Welcome to the second day of the Tech Days conference. I hope you all had a great evening, but still that you are awake when we are going to talk today about what we've added for data access in the current release. I am Lars Hammer and I'm an architect on NAV, and with me today I have Jesper, who is working mainly on our data access features. The same goes for Klaus, who is here, and Bardo, who is the application guy that we're fortunate to have with us today. So without longer introduction, here is the headlines for what we'll do today. I am very pleased that I get to give you the overview for the talk with just a few slides. And then Bardo will take us through a couple of examples of the new query object and explain you about the features that we put in there. And Klaus will take over and utilize that from the outside and talk a lot about OData that allows you to expose data. And then Jesper will tell you about what we have done in terms of performance and how you can utilize that. And Klaus will come back and talk about security filtering at the end. So, in just 5 bullet points, we'll run through the server architecture and list some of the optimizations and features that we added in there. What's happened to the set of application object types and what does that mean to the CAL programming language, and then the development environment. So this is sort of an overview of the internals of the NAV server, and most of what you see here is pretty much the way that it looked previously, except that you now see that we have the NAS or the NAS services inside. We've added the query thing that you can utilize in the application. We have a component that exposes OData web services to the internet, right? We've added the debugger, which you have seen also in the keynote session, so that we now have normal and debug sessions. Of course, we have also other clients like SharePoint and the web client. There's also actually a management plugin that's running in the Microsoft Management Console, and that's also serviced by the server. And then last but not least, we have done basically redone the data access layer, so that is nearly all in managed code now. And you'll see more about what that means as we go on. This is a list of the things that we were able to add to this release. Because we changed everything to managed and we are focusing on the SQL Server now, we have some things and optimizations that we have been able to put in place. Like we have improved caching, we have connection pooling so that we better utilize the resources on the server. There's a little thing about temporary tables that used to sort differently. Because of the Windows collations we are now using, they actually sort like they should. Debugger and query application objects. We also now do background sessions. And we have, in addition to the management console UI, we also have a programmatic access for doing management. So there's a whole host of things that this has allowed us to do in this release. So as you probably all are aware by now, you can no longer access your data through the classic client. So that means that forms and data ports and the classic reports we have to say goodbye to. Hello, we say to the concept of query, which we'll be looking much more into. It's actually doing what we have been asked by all of you for a long time. Why can't we utilize the features of the SQL Server to read data in a much more efficient way? And that's exactly what we're doing with query. Now what you see around query in the current release is the first step that we were able to put in. We have very high ambitions for where we want to take this concept. We want to make it the way of reading data inside of NAV. So eventually, down the road, in an unspecified number of years, what we expect to see is that the application will always be using query for reading and only use the record API when it actually needs to go and change data. So that's one of the directions that we are seeing for query. Another is that we foresee that we will be able to, as we model the query, utilize also external data sources as data items, so that you can actually, through this OData approach, deal with external data directly inside of your CAL code. So that's another future thing. We kind of turned the XML port into a more complete story and took some of the data port features that it didn't support and added those, so that it's not only XML but also things like comma-separated files you can import. When it comes to the programming model, we've added a couple of features on the record API that surface some of these new capabilities that we've been able to put into the managed data stack. There's a couple listed here, and we'll go into more detail. Of course, we have a programmatic API for the query, so that you can get at that data from your CAL code in a very simple NAV-style approach. The thing that I didn't mention before about the future of query related to where we are is one of the things that we would of course like to do also is to allow queries to drive pages directly, but that did not make it into the current release. What made it in is actually queries driving charts in the UI, and then also driving AL code. So that's why this AL API is particularly important. If you want to surface query data in a page, what you do is you write a piece of AL code that actually transfers that into a temporary table, and then you can show that. Then we have the topic of background sessions, which is really a very simple concept that you can just start up another session that runs on the server. So the start session API is there for that, and then you can also do some administration and you're allowed to stop sessions and so forth. So a very sort of simple but yet extremely powerful concept was introduced there. And I'm trying to click ahead. So what did we do to the development environment? It is still the classic development environment. We've rebranded it and call it now the development environment instead of Seaside. Seaside is short for client-server integrated development environment, and we really passed the client-server architecture now, so that's why we did this rebranding. But then we added, I wasn't very modest, I just put world-class CAL debugger here, and I really think it is a great debugger that we've added. And of course, you're able to run all of your application objects on the server directly from within Seaside. We also have added the ability to see the CAL call stack from the SQL profiler. So, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Badur, who will talk about query.
Thank you, Lars. So, why don't we switch to our development environment and start creating a query. So let's say we want to look at some financial data. I think that would be a typical example of a query. So let's take table 17, GL entry, and we want some fields from it, right? So we take account number, and we can give it a meaningful name instead of this predefined G underscore and so on. So you just call it account. And we want the posting date. You can see I can either use the field number or just like the normal selection process in Designer. And I want the amount. So this is basically what you could do, or an example of what you can do in the query. Now, let's say you want to have some dimensions attached to it. Let's say you want to also show some of the shortcut dimensions. So I want to join this table to the dimension set entry, right? So to do that, you can see it's indented, right? You can see it automatically indents, so that the next ones will be indented, similar to the report designer. And I will look at the properties. And I will make it a bit wider so you can see. So there is a data item link. I need to tell how to link this. So what I do want is the dimension set ID. I want to link to the GL entry, obviously, and to the field 480 dimension set ID. Now, I also need to choose which dimension I want, whether it's at the area or department or whatever. And of course, I could go in and say, put a constant into this filter. But I could also do it in the way that I want to look up in the general ledger setup, because in the general ledger setup we have defined shortcut dimension 1, 2, 3, and so forth up to 8. So how do we do that? Well, we could add the general ledger setup here, and then you have to indent the rest here. But how do you link GL entry to general ledger setup? I mean, you have to link it to something. Well, you can't. So what you do is you go to the data item link type and set it to SQL advanced options and do a cross join. And now you can go here, down to this one, and in the data item link, now you can add that the dimension code should link to general ledger setup, and then you need to find the shortcut dimension. Are we having a phone call here? Dimension set 1 code. I know that, of course, dimension set global 1, dimension 1 and 2 are already on the GL entry, so technically this is not necessary, but this is just to illustrate the concept. And if there is no dimension value for it, I just use the blank as default. And the field I want to have displayed, I could choose the dimension value code, but I can also choose the dimension value name. And here we already have a pretty advanced feature, because the dimension value name, that's a flow field on the dimension set entry table. So if you go to table 480, you can see dimension value name. You can see it's a flow field. So in the query, I can choose flow fields and have them selected similar to any other field. It's returned to me automatically. I'll call this department, because I know it's department. I mean, otherwise we could call it global dimension 1 Let's say I want another one. I can just copy this and paste it there. I have to indent it. And here I would then have to change these to global dimension 2 code, right? Or maybe I should save this as...
Why do you indent that?
Sorry, the question was why do I indent it? That's a SQL thing. You have every data item is a child of anything else. So if this matches into SQL, then you select from some table and then you join some table on that. That creates then a new set, which you again can join on. Maybe Jesper can explain more afterwards. Pardon? Yes, and it is. Technically, once you have joined these two, they become a set. They become a new data set or record. Or then when you have added this one, then this becomes something you can join to. Remember, when you run this just comes out as if it was one table. The join criteria shows it. We can also take that afterwards. There's a question here.
Why do you put on the caption? You just put in name, department, project.
Currently, we don't have captions as far as I remember, because think of this as a table for one thing, but you currently can only consume it programmatically. You can't bind this to a form or report, so there is no display target here. Captions are only used to, and when you do it programmatically, I mean either through here or through some web service, you need to know the exact name. It should not be language dependent. But otherwise, good question. Now another feature. You need to give this a separate name, right? Names have to be unique. So another thing is now I get all my GL entries out as a flat data set, but I want them summarized by amount, right? So here in the method, I choose totaling, and then I can choose sum, which is obviously what I want, but I could have chosen count, average, min, max. And you can see now everything is grouped by all the other fields. But now, what I want here is I only want to look at expenses. So what I can do here is I will look at properties again. And here I can say I only want to see account numbers that are within a certain range. I happen to know these are my expense accounts. Now another thing is, so now I'll get one entry per day out. But let's say I want to summarize this by month. So that would enable me to posting date. I can also do a grouping there and say I want a date function. And here I can say I want it by month. So I'll just call this month. And the amount, I'll just call it amount. just to have nice names for it. Unfortunately, the month just gives me exactly that. It will give me the month number. So it will give me 1, 2, 3, up to 12. And of course, I also want the year, right? So that's why I would insert posting date once a year again, call the year, choose date and year. So what I would expect now is I get the account number, year, month, and amount. I mean the total amount per all the others. And then I want to attach department and project code, or rather global dimension 1 and global dimension 2. And as I said in the beginning, I know that these they are already on the GL entry. But so if we run this one, you can see nice account. You get the year, month, amount, department. Project is not here, but probably somewhere down here. Here, right here, start with some projects. And as you probably have seen before in some other presentations, you can consume this from code. I mean, inside your AL code or your code unit, you declare a query variable, and then you can open and read from it. But you can do more. So, just to recap, we have the query object. We have some, what we saw is we had a cross join, which means that since we only have one general ledger set up, we can safely cross join with GL entry. And then we put on the filter. We used some totaling methods, both for dates and amounts. And we could look up flow fields. And this was the result set. But fortunately, you can do more with a query. I mean, you can do something else. And this is where Klaus will talk us through.
Thank you, Badu.
Something called OData.
Thank you, Badu.
I think you need to.
Thank you, Badu. Before showing you what you can do with the query from OData, I'll just give you a brief introduction to OData. OData is a new web service protocol that is exposed by NAV 2013. It's a REST-style protocol. And the REST-style protocol is characterized by the entities that you expose all have an ID that maps into primary key in NAV context. Relations are contained, so if you have relations between tables, or pages and subpages, that is contained. And it uses the standard HTTP protocol of GET and PUT and so forth. Today, there's several of our other Microsoft products that supports OData, either for reading and consuming data, or also for modifying data. There's also some websites that expose their content as OData. And on the top of my head, there is Netflix, eBay, the Azure Data Market. And you can find the complete list of both applications and web services, websites that uses OData on the OData website. I'll encourage you to go there and look. The list is constantly updated. And you can also find specifications and other stuff about OData. It's a good site. But let's show you what we can do with this. So, not that one. The first thing you need to do is expose the NAV object as a web service. So let's go into the web service table. And this is done just like for SOAP web services. So let's take the object that Bardur created for us just before, and let's call that expenses and expose it. Having done that, this endpoint is now available on NAV for the OData. And one thing you need to do is find the address, and that is, if you can't do it on top of the head, it's most easily done by using the event viewer. I'll just show you. Because when the NAV server starts up, it logs as an event the endpoint, the OData endpoint that it's using for OData queries. So go to the find. I'll just wait a little until I've loaded the events. But it's really easy. Just go in here, you do the find, and just simply search for OData. And as you can see, here is my endpoint. I'll copy that. And then switch to Excel. For Excel, there is the SQL team has made an add-on called Power Pivot, which can consume these OData endpoints. So let's go in here, find the data feed up here. Then we need to provide the URI. Just copy in what I had before. Test the connection to see if it's on. Yeah, it's working. So next, Power Pivot will show you the resources that are exposed by that OData endpoint that you've added. And as you can see here, we have three entities or resources exposed. We have the company, which is a standard, which is always present on every NAV installation. Then I also exposed the customer, and then expenses query that Bardur created. So we'll check this one off and press finish. Now Excel consumes all the data that it finds in this endpoint, and it's really powerful, really high performance. So you can have a lot of rows fetched by Power Pivot, and it'll be really fast. Here we just got 809 rows. And if you're really good at remembering, you can see it's the same rows as Bardur showed you before when he ran the query. So the next thing I want to show is we want to do a pivot table on this. So now it fetched it. I would like to group by department, project, like to see the amount, and also by year and month. But as you saw, when I clicked month and year, they were grouped out here directly, but I would like to have them as column labels, so I can just drag them up here. Tap it there. Whoops. Where did my month go? Up there. So now you can see we have the full set of data categorized by project and department, and we have the year and the month across. I can collapse them so we can see I have the 2 years here. You can save this workbook from within Excel when you're satisfied with whatever you've done. So let's just save this. And then you can just close it. And then at a later point, you can pass this file on to somebody. They can go in, find the file, and you will see now that the data is in here. And if you go into the Power Pivot window, you can see there is a refresh button. So if new data comes along, they go in here, press the refresh, new data is fetched if anything has happened since the last time that this spreadsheet was saved. You can see this is a really powerful tool for a low-cost BI solution. And for the newest version of Excel, the one that will be coming shortly, Power Pivot is directly included in Excel, so you don't need to go and fetch an extra add-on for making this work. So let's go back to the presentation. Yes? So the question was, this Power Pivot, is that only available in Excel 2010 and forward? Actually, I don't know if they support the previous version of Excel. 2010 supports it, and 2013 it's directly imported. Oh, I just got some hints from Michael and Badu. It's not supported in the earlier versions of Excel. So Excel 2010 is the first version that supports Power Pivot. Sorry, can you repeat that? Oh, which credentials are saved? It's the current users that save them. But I think when you pass on, if you give the Excel sheet to somebody else, when they connect, they will use their own credentials, as far as I know. I'll get back to the company name shortly. So, what did we see here? We see that NAV 2013 exposes OData, a new web service protocol. It's a new integration point that you can use to consume data from NAV from applications and web services outside. When you use the Power Pivot, you have a really powerful, low-cost BI solution that most people can use. And if you want to see more of this, I encourage you to take a look at this walkthrough that is on MSDN. We can also see how to combine data from NAV OData with other sources. There's the demo of the Azure Data Market, where you categorize by some country development areas and stuff like that. That's a really good walkthrough that will give you really good insight on what you can use this for. So, what OData capabilities do we have in NAV 2013? The full OData protocol is both read and write, but in this first version of the OData for NAV, we only have the read part. So it's a read-only solution with one caveat. If you expose a page and you have some code in, let's say, the onOpenForm trigger, that code will be executed, and if that does some reading to the database, you will actually have some write capabilities. But you don't have write capabilities from the OData endpoint as such. There is a server paging, so you will not, if you expose the DL entry table or something like that, you will not get a full set of data. You will have the possibility of paging this. Default is 1,000 records, but you can tweak that using the configuration, either the PowerShell commandlets or the management tool. There's also a standard metadata endpoint on OData, which you can use to get a description of what data are exposed, the types and the fields and relations between the different OData resources. Filter, there's a filter support for OData, that's supported. Count is not supported, but you can use flow fields to get around that. You can expose queries as OData endpoint, as you saw, and you can also expose pages. So what do you do to get started? You publish a page or a query or multiple as an endpoint, as I show you. You find the OData endpoint either by looking at the event viewer or your standard URI and then /OData at the end. So the three main usages of OData is PowerView, as I showed you. Then there is programmatic access. You can code against an OData endpoint using .NET, and if you use a link, you have a really powerful query language that you can use to query the OData from, and you can create all sorts of .NET programs that can do a lot of things. And then you have what I call execution by hand. I will show you in a short while what that is. When you develop your OData endpoints, maybe when you design your queries or pages and you want to see them that they are correct, then a quick way of seeing this is using execution by hand, which is seeing the endpoint in a browser. So I have some sample OData queries here. I'll just quickly show you how it looks if you do the execution by hand. So it asks you if you want to trust this. Yes, I do trust myself. And here you can see that the standard endpoint, the base endpoint, exposes or returns the resources that are currently exposed by this OData endpoint. And you can see it's the company, which is always there. Then it's my customer that I exposed. And then it's the expenses query that Bardo did. So this way you can always get a good idea of what is exposed on this endpoint. And this basically goes for all OData. So if you get hold of some other OData feeds, you can use this technique as well. But you can do more. The next part, the next part here, you can access the customer, which will give you all the records from the customer resource. You can also use keys. Here we just have a simple key, but if you have a complex key with more fields, then you just inside the parentheses write the name of each field and the value, and then you can get hold of that. You can do filtering, which is standard OData stuff where you can set up, you can say, okay, here I want customers with location code equal to blue. And you can, there's a lot of different ways to construct this filter, and you can see more at the OData website. You can also control which fields that you want to have in returned by your OData resource. And here I just selected name, location code, and credit limit. And if that can help you if you have some standard pages that you want to expose, and maybe you don't want to have all the fields returned, then you can use this technique to just get a subset of the fields. And then the last one, I'll show you can do a combination. So here I've done, okay, I want all the customers with location blue, and I just want these three fields. The last one you can do is the metadata query, and this will, when you run this, you will get a description of how this OData endpoint is constructed, what resources are, what each resource contains of fields, name, city, whatever, and the type of the field. And you will also get the keys. If there are any keys, they will also be listed in the key section. And then the last thing that are included in this metadata is the relationships. And relationships in NAV are only supported for pages. So if you expose a page, there's two ways you would get relations. The first one is if you have a sub-page on the page. So let's say you expose the sales order page. There you will have a resource called sales order, and you will also have a resource called sales order lines, which is exposed automatically, and you will have the relation between the two tables automatically. That's one way of having relations for NAV. The other way is if there is relations between the tables, table relations, and you expose both of the tables, we will automatically detect that they are both exposed. And if there is a lookup page on the related table, we will find the relation and expose that as a relation in the OData feed. Coming back to the question about company support, we do support companies in OData. If you don't supply a company name in your resource, you will get the default company, the one that the user last used, or you can specify the company directly in the resource string. So as you can see, So as you can see here, I just added company and then Kronos International, and then I just continue as I would before with okay, I want the customer, and then I can add filters, whatever, from here. And then I will always go into this company when accessing this feed. So one thing that I'll also highlight is this one. When you want to do the execution by hand, if you use Internet Explorer, then by default, this feed reading is turned on. If you don't turn this off, you will get just a view in Internet Explorer that just say RSS feed, and you can't see any data. So if you want to do the execution by hand, go into options and turn this one off, so it looks like this. And with this, over to Jesper.
Thank you, Klaus. So now you've seen some of these fantastic things you can do with all the stuff we'd added in 2013. So now it's time to take a walk into the engine room, so to speak, and look at some of the things we've done under the covers and some details that is good to be aware of when you start using this new version. So as Lars mentioned, the data stack has been completely rewritten. The old NDBCS, ODBC-based data access DLL is gone, and it's been replaced by purely managed code, which uses ADO. ADO is a better long-term solution for us because it's maintained by the SQL team itself, and it supports all the new features as opposed to the old MDAC ODBC stack. By making this rewrite, we have a much better performing, more scalable data stack in place. We share different things like caching and connections across users. So overall, the experience will be that it scales better and performs better. I think some of you guys have already made some measurement to testify to that. So connection pooling is basically means that the link, the direct one-to-one mapping from a NAV user to the database is broken. A user asks for a connection whenever he needs it. Most likely he will get the same connection that he got the last time because that connection is ready to, it contains all these cache statements and so on. But it's not guaranteed they will get that connection. This also reduces memory consumption. Unless users are constantly doing things at the same time, then you will have much less connections to the SQL Server than before. We cache data across all users now. So say someone opens or reads all the items, then another user will read that from the cache instead of go and read it from the database. Before, this stuff was all done per user, which uses a lot of memory and of course puts extra load on the unnecessary load on the database. The only thing we don't cache in this version is query results. When you have a setup with multiple NSTs, we have this automatic cache synchronization in place, which basically guarantees that all changes will be populated on the different NSTs within 1 minute. There was some sort of cache synchronization in the old versions as well, but it was timer based and it was specific for each user. This is a much more deterministic way of handling things. You know that any change will be available at the other workstations, the other NSTs, within 1 minute. We've gotten rid of the old security models. They were primarily in place to make the two-tier model more secure. You had the standard and the enhanced model. They are gone, and we purely check the permissions inside the NST. This also means that there's no need to run the synchronize all logins anymore, and we don't need this extended stored procedure that we install on the server either. There's been a lot of talk in the past about, should I use this find method or that find method? All this talk was relevant because, find set was not using cursors, whereas find was using cursors most of the time. That whole discussion is basically eliminated now that we don't use cursors anymore. It also improves performance because it sets SQL Server free to actually choose the best plan for any query, which means that you don't have to think so hard about remembering to call set current key and stuff like that to ensure that SQL chooses the right path. It has much more freedom now, and most often will choose the optimal plan for getting your data. We made a number of improvements when it comes to character data. We now support Unicode, which means that you can store different languages in the same database. However, there's still only one sorting supported. We only support Windows collations now instead of SQL or the old Windows collations for that matter. This enabled us to do some performance optimizations inside the server where we can basically eliminate certain types of queries, never send them to SQL because we can calculate the result of that query. Say, the query wouldn't return anything because of conflicting filters. We can now reliably make such optimizations in the NST. This, of course, means that we need to convert all the data. This happens when you do the technical upgrade part of the upgrade. It's all done in one step. We both convert the collation to the new collation, and we convert to Unicode in one step. It will bring up a dialog basically suggesting the new Windows collation, and then you can, if you accept that, the conversion will take place. So as I said, we support Unicode, meaning you can store different languages in the same database, but there's still only one sorting that can take place, and that depends on the chosen collation. Because we now use Windows collations, we can get some help from the Windows engine and sort our own temporary tables the same way that SQL sorts its data. The old temporary tables were sorted ordinally, so basically when you had character data, it would, the sorting wouldn't make much sense. Similarly, when the whole marked records concept has been re-implemented, and what we do now is that we try to convert all the marks to a filter that we can send to SQL, and then again we ask SQL to sort the data that we get back. The old implementation would basically have a list that would loop through and then would ask for each record that was marked. So a huge performance gain, and at the same time we will actually sort data according to what's ever been set up in the collation. Similarly, we use SQL Server to support accent and case-insensitive searches, the so-called add operator. That goes through SQL now as well to make things consistent. We made some improvements to how CAC sums, how CAC fields, how they work internally. They can support more, they can use SIFT for more different calculation types like count and average. And we've actually decoupled the requirement to have a SIFT index from CAC sum and CAC fields, which means that you don't necessarily have to define a SIFT index in order to do a CAC sum request. We use min and max SQL functions now instead of trying to find the lesser value through multiple statements in SQL. And with regards to security filtering, when you're in the validated mode that Klaus is going to talk some more about in a minute, we don't have to walk through data to see to detect whether you're trying to look at data that you don't have access for. So we save a lot of database round trips there as well. We've got a new function called set autocalc fields, as Lars showed. What this does is instruct us to, when we go and get data from a table, say the customer table, then we can get the balance, for instance. We can calculate the balance flow field in one go, in one statement from SQL. This is automatically used if you filter on a flow field, say you want all the customers with a balance greater than 0, then we will use this functionality to transfer this whole request into a single SQL statement. And Lars mentioned where we were using query. Actually, internally, we even use query to drive this feature, the set autocalc fields, which means that all pages and all reports where you use set auto-calculate fields in the reports, all those types of reports and pages will use queries internally to fetch data. So there's a quick example where we are looping through customer data. We are calculating the sales and the balance for customers. This is how the code will look before. Now you can basically make a call to set autocalc fields before you start the looping, and then it's automatically fed into the record as we fetch them. Buffered inserts, there are more cases where we can use buffered inserts now. Buffered inserts is basically about actually sending the records to the database as late as possible, thereby reducing locking and blocking as much as possible. There are more cases in this version where we can actually use that feature. In earlier versions, some customers were having problems with, especially if they had large sales orders, they would have problems where, if one user was doing shipment and another user was doing shipment on a different order, sometimes they would actually block each other. We've seen some pretty horrible examples of that. We've made some changes in the version which should vastly improve that situation. Basically, we changed the isolation level in SQL so that whenever we lock a set of records, we don't accidentally lock neighboring records. The downside is that with this version, we only lock the actual records that you request, the actual records that are in the database. So say we lock all the lines for a sales order, line 1,000 to 2,000, let's say that, then we no longer actually block someone from inserting a line 1,500. So something in between, So if you don't block this by other means, that will actually be possible in this version. To the best of our knowledge, it's not a problem in the standard application, but it's something to be aware of for your customizations. In this version, we also introduced the first of, I hope, many checks to improve the AL code. The first one we've done is basically a check, which means that we will block accidental overwrites of data. So in my example here, I have two instances of the same record, and I start out by making some modifications to it here. So now the value of field 1 is C and the value of field 2 is D. Then using a different instance of the same record, I modify field 2 to E, and then I go and use the old version, my record 1 up there, to make a single modification to field F. But because it's an old version, field 2 is still equal to D. That's of course not good. So in this version, we will actually prevent such accidental overrides by throwing a runtime version, right? And we expect to add more of those kind of tests going forward. I mean, this first version of the check will only block if you overwrite the record outside the transaction. So if you take an old record from an old transaction and overwrite, we will block it, but similar things could happen within transaction, but we don't block that in this version. The client monitor feature isn't there anymore. It wasn't there in 2009 either. The improvement we've made in this version is that we have added a AL call stack feature, so that you can basically have the SQL that we sent instrumented with the AL call stack, so that if you're looking at some problematic SQL, something that's very slow, you can trace it back to the AL that issued the SQL. And the way you enable this is through our fabulous debugger UI. You basically have these. You have this button to enable it for all users, or you can basically just check this mark here for a single user, and we will start lock the AL call stack so that you, for instance, you can look at it through the SQL profiler. This is a sample of how that would look like. So you have a SQL statement here, and just before this SQL statement, you have the AL call stack, and I'm showing it down here how it will look. We have a blog post out which shows an example of how you can basically turn this around so that you can have, a row with the SQL statement, then the user, and then the AL call stack. A few changes here as well. We have, some of you might know the system tables field and key and object. You used to be able to actually modify the metadata by making changes to those tables. This is not supported in 2013. Over to you, Klaus. News about security filters.
Yes. Thank you, Jesper. So, if you ever tried working with an installation where security filters or record level security has been used, you know that this can be really hard. It's not a simple thing to get right. And we try to address some of it in this version of NAV. More specifically, we try to give you as app developers more control of how your code works if some security administrator puts up a security filter on one of the tables that you use. So the goal is to enable you to think about how should my code behave if somebody puts a security filter on one of the tables that I'm currently using within inside my code. To do that, we have enhanced the options for security filtering. Before you had what we call filtered and validated. Now we added two new modes called ignored and disallowed. Furthermore, on each record variable, there's a new property called security filtering, and this can be set design time on explicitly created variables, where you can choose which mode this record variable should behave whenever a security filter has been set. There is also an AL function to change this, but we encourage you to use the properties. I'll try to give you an example of this, and so you can see what we have done. Oh, that was the wrong one. Here. So in 2013, we've moved the setup of permissions and users inside the RTC. So you can now set up all security for within the RTC, and you don't need to use the synchronized logins. And actually, whenever you make changes to security, they are picked up by the server automatically, immediately. So if you have some issue and an administrator go in and modify security, then they will be picked up by the server immediately. So what I've done here is that I've taken some of the standard permission sets, and I've removed a couple of tables within here. There used to be customer and sales header from in here. I removed them and extracted them to some other permission sets. I have one here which just gives permissions to all records for these 3 tables that I will give to users that should have full access. Then I have created a special one for Susan, which has some security filters set up here. So you can see I have limited her view on GL accounts. I have limited her view of customers to only see her own customers, and similarly only see her own sales. So I've set up Susan here, and down here you can see I've given her the normal basic tables, the customer posting, whatever she needs, and then this special group where I extracted the tables that I want to filter, and she has these set up. So let's switch to Susan. You can see down here that I'm now logged in as Susan. So if I go and look at my customers, I get a limited set of customers. And let me see if I can find it. Here you can see they all have salesperson code PS, which was what I set up for Susan. If I go into sales orders, you will see the same here. There's only a limited set of sales orders. So this is the filtering mode, which all UI is in. So only show the filtered view. So let's have Susan create a new sales order. Just pick a number and then find the customer. And again, here you see only the filtered set of customers. Only the customers that Susan are allowed to use are here. Just pick the first one. And let's add a single line. Let's take GL account where we put a filter on. And again here you see only a filtered list of the available GL accounts. Go in here, select that, put in some quantity, and I'm done for now. So that's the first step. So she can create the sales order. The next part, she wants to post this as well. So let's go ahead. The posting starts. Just take a little while. I think I have a cold server here, so a few seconds, it should be done. No, it errored. Actually came up and said, oops, a security filter has been applied to the GL account. You cannot do this. So this is where, when the previous versions of NAV, to fix this, you actually both need the app developer and you need the security administrator, because you needed to go in and set up indirect permissions for the code unit that are doing the postings, and you need the administrator to define a permission set with indirect permissions and assign that to Susan. So we tried to fix this. So now I'm back to my app developer role, and I just happen to know that two code units are in play here. This one, and let's go to the list of globals. And I have a GL account variable, which is the one that I used to do the posting. So let's look at properties. Here you can see that security filtering is set to validated. And validated is the old way of saying, I want to access records, but if I access a record outside of my filter, it should error. You now have the control as app developer to say, okay, when this code runs, I know that whoever has access to run this code unit is able to do this, are allowed to actually do this. So this record, I'll actually say that when this runs, it should ignore security filters. So let's do that. Save it. And I know we have one more with the same issue. So again, find the variable. It's a bit further down. Here we go. And again, validate it. Let's change this to ignored. So, and now let's go back to Susan. So we have the sales order that she tried to post before. Let's try to do it once more. Posting starts. And everything is done. So you can see now, you can now as an app developer, when you develop your code, you can make sure that the code will work if somebody sets up security filters. So let's go back to the presentation. So what you saw was that we had a property on each record variable, and you now have 4 modes that each record can work in and with respect to security filters. The first one is ignored, the one that we used. This is when you say, okay, I know that this code runs in a safe way, so if anybody sets up security filters, I can ignore them, and I know that I will not expose data that is not used. It does put a bit of responsibility on you. You can't use this if, for instance, you're dumping some data to a file or something. Then you could expose data that an administrator wants to prevent the user from seeing. But it gives you the power to ignore security filter. Then we have the filtered, and it is what we use for all UI and entry objects, which is you will only see the records that are within your filter. If you use a record that is in the filtered mode to insert records, it will succeed as long as the records that you insert are within your filters. But if you insert a record that is outside your filter, you will get an error, like the one we saw. Validated, is similar to filtered. I like to think of it as a sort of the same as optimistic concurrency in SQL, but it's optimistic security, meaning that I'll just go ahead, try to access the records, and as long as I'm within my filter, everything is fine, but the moment I step outside of my filter, I will get an error. And that was actually exactly what we saw in the example just before, because the GL account variable was in the validated mode. And it works the same with insert. If you try to insert or modify records outside, you will have the same check. This is the default mode for NAV 2009, and so we carried that over. And then the last one is disallowed. And the idea behind that is you're writing some code. You know that this code needs full access to this table. But you don't want to take the responsibility of saying, okay, I give full access to the user by using the ignore, but you want to say, okay, I want to alert the user that he's trying to do something that he shouldn't do because he has limited permissions. So if you set something to disallowed, an administrator puts up a security field on that, and Susan tries to execute that piece of code, it will immediately error saying that you cannot run this code as you have a security filter applied. So it will stop immediately. It will not try to do anything. It will stop the moment that it accesses this record for the first time. So, default values. We have two types of record variables. We have the explicit record variables that you declare yourself. That was what I showed you. You can see in the property window for the variable, you can see what mode it is. And the default value is validated. And it means that you run the optimistic security model. You try to go along, modify record, read record, whatever, but if you get outside, it errors. It's the same as in the earlier versions of NAV. So that's backwards compatible. Then we have the implicitly record variables. That means the rec on the page and on reports and XML ports. They all run in filtered mode, which means that they will show you only what is within your filter. If you use the record variable to do something outside, it will error. I'll get back to queries in just a second. We've chosen these values for backwards compatibility. So your applications, after having been upgraded to 2013, should behave the same. One thing that we did, though, is there was a call before which was set permission filter. It, in effect, changed from validated to filtered mode. That call is still there, but we encourage you not to use it. But if you need to do something, then change the property. But what it does is exactly the same as before. It actually changes the property on the record from validated to filtered. But if you need to do something in that encode, use the property instead. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to go through the entire app and making it compliant for security filtering. So if you are in a setup where you know your customers are using security filters, you have to go in and screen the application for security filtering and set up the places where you know that this can be an issue. Queries. They also support security filtering, but not the validated mode. Validated mode is there for backwards compatibility, but it's not something that we would like to carry forward because it's kind of strange and it does give some performance impact. So we have not introduced it for query, and if we in the future introduce new objects that will operate on records in some form, it will not be there in either. So for queries, you have ignored filtered, and disallowed. A couple of, yeah. So the question was, for a query, is it set per data item or is it for the entire query? And the answer is, it's for the entire query that you set it. So if you think of the query as another form of combining a table, that it will give you a combined table, then on that you will set the filter. So if you have a query that consists of 3 tables and there is a security filter on one of them, the security filter will be applied on that table and the other 2 will have the full set of records available. Some performance considerations that you should think about. It's mostly for the validated property, because the validated mode does make us go into record by record validation in some cases in the NST. So you should always try to use the filtered, if possible. That will make us, the security filter will then be passed on to SQL, and SQL will do the filtering, so that's the fastest we can do. Or the ignored, if that's a possibility, then there will be absolutely no filter at all. If you're invalidated, we have put some optimizations in place, and we will check if you hit records outside of your filter, so that even if you run validated, we for some cases can do it in a performant way with just an extra exist call to the SQL server to check if you're within or outside of your filter. Yes, Lars, have a small commercial?
Yes, a brief commercial before we move on to the Q&A section. As some of you know, we have added testability features into NAV, and we've actually prepared a survey, which is a 2-pager thing that we would like to ask you to fill in, regardless of whether you are using or are not using testability today. We'd like to improve that set of features for you all. And what will happen is, as you exit this room after the Q&A, we will have a bunch of guys standing outside and hand out these surveys. So we'd appreciate it very much if you can find the time to go and fill those out. Thanks, and now on to the Q&A. And we do have T-shirts again, right? Yes, so again, good or fun questions will be awarded with a T-shirt. Let's go up here first.
Should be possible. Let me just find it here.
So we
What is there a question or
maybe while you're finding that, another really quick one is how do option strings render into a query results?
So the question is, if I have an option string, how is that rendered in the query result? Who can take that? Yeah. Take it.
The best answer is, let's try. Once the PC is ready. Another user has locked it.
So are you saying it's recommended practice now going forward to not have the insert inside the loop?
So the question is it recommended not to do the insert inside the loop? No, actually, the whole idea is to keep this transparent for you guys. The way the code is written here, where I just do an insert and do not check the result of that operation, means that we can use buffered inserts underneath. Yeah. So the question is does adding the commit here actually decrease performance, as I hear the question? But does it defeat the use of buffered inserts? But I have the commit, you'll notice, outside the loop.
So I think the commit is on this slide, just to be explicit about that. When the commit happens is when the insert will actually occur. This is not to say that you should insert commits everywhere. Right, so there's no recommendation in that. It's just to be explicit about that the inserts will happen only when you commit, whether it's explicit as here or it's implicit when you return. Yeah, no change in that. Good question. That's a t-shirt right there. I'm very bad at throwing.
So let's take a look at the option value.
Sorry.
Yeah, maybe we can take another question in between.
I'd like to know if security filters support the new security plus filtered values like my customers and use that in security filters.
So the question is, can you use the new my customers and my something in security filters? And unfortunately, the answer is no. We have not support for that, not yet. So the question is, do Windows groups still work for security? And I guess you mean Active Directory groups. And yes, they do work. So you can put up assign security to Windows groups. What you need to do, if I can just quickly show it here, is that you need to go in, and when you create the user, you need to select Windows group as the license type. And then you can assign permission sets to that Windows group, and they will be picked up when the user logs in. One thing, there's a change from the previous version, is that now you need to explicitly create all users. So you will need to create the user, but then we will pick up that this user is member of AD group, and then give her or him the needed permissions. But you need to create the user.
From a query, can you do that transformation? Like if config code equals blank, then config code equals France. That transformation from a query.
So the question was, can we do any transformation in queries? No. You can select, and that's it. I mean, it's not a full query engine. It is a very limited set. We don't have union, for instance, either. So.
Back then we had C++, and one of the nice things of C++ is that you were able to organize that access without having to have objects into NAV. And now if you want to access NAV from a third-party application, you need to have some NAV objects. Have you got any plan on improving providing an API where you don't need to have any NAV object and be able to access NAV without creating any NAV object from a third-party
So the question is about accessing NAV data without having an object defined for that purpose. Is that the question?
as it was with C-Front.
But C-Front, well,
So,
but C-Front was.
so the short answer to the question, which is about can I expose data without actually going and creating explicit objects, and in NAV 2013 the answer is no. And you were asking, are we considering for the future to allow that? And the answer to that is yes.
But a more
So you wanted
constructive
to
one
add?
is, I mean, you have SQL Server, right? So you have all the access to SQL Server that you want.
Yeah, that is true.
But maybe we don't want the user to use that. Then we have all the pages. I mean, there are like 1,500 pages or something like that, right? And you can choose to expose them as OData sources.
And there's
So out of the box, you have 1,500 or so.
Yeah. And there are also techniques where you can automate exposing these objects from the outside using scripting and so forth. Yeah. Come here.
Regarding OData, is it possible to filter the flow filters to limit the flow fields which are returned through the OData?
So the question is, can I use the filter syntax of OData to actually set up a flow filter for filtering on my calculated fields?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not 100%. I believe so. You can do it.
I would guess Bardo would want to try it on stage, right? As we're
You mean
taking more questions?
So the question is about filtering on
Specifying a flow filter.
I know that you can expose the flow
So,
field, but you can expose the flow filter, but I'm not sure it's...
yes. Let's come to the experts lab and we'll try it like we were playing yesterday.
I'm pretty sure you can do it, but I'm not 100% sure.
Let's try it
Yes,
out.
flow filters are supported through queries, and so when you expose a query, I absolutely believe you can do so. Yes.
Let's play with that offline.
Again, a query. Let's have a query type with customer and a few flow fields. If we go inside from OData and say, okay, I just want the customer number and one of the flow fields, when the query is sent to SQL, does it get all the flow fields or just the one I asked?
So question is, if you define a query with customer number, say customer number and a flow field, multiple flow fields, yeah. And you only select one in OData. No, the query is sent as is to SQL, so it means it will calculate the others as well.
Yeah,
We
up
have
here.
a question over here for a while.
Okay.
I think this gentleman over here. I didn't hear that. Yeah, so the question is, now that we log into SQL Server with a single powerful account, obviously you cannot use the, you don't have the credentials of the original user creating or connecting to the system. Absolutely true, you don't have it in SQL Server. You'll need to build such systems from AL.
Well, there is a set of Code Unit 1 triggers. There are 5 triggers that you can go and use. And they're called on database, insert, and modify. Right. So the question is specifically now about the object table, which is obviously not supported since we only go and change that through the development environment and not running in the RTC, whereas on the server, where that's the only place we can actually execute code. So you're perfectly right that there is that limitation. So what we're doing internally when we are working with such tools is that we assume that there's always, your problem is you have something external to the object table that you want to keep in sync. So the assumption that we are making when we are doing tools like that is that they are out of sync. Right, so it's always a process of getting those in sync. That's a different approach than saying I have this other representation of my objects that I want to constantly keep in sync. We basically sort of stepped away from that and said whenever the user's doing an operation, the assumption is that there is some amount of stuff that's not in sync, so we have to start doing that. So that's kind of a change. I don't know if that's actually helping you very much, but maybe you can seek me out offline.
Just a comment. When you use a development environment, you log in as you to the SQL server, right? So
yeah, so maybe your SQL triggers is actually still valid in that scenario because you are not logging on through the runtime. That's a good point, Paolo. Yeah.
I think it deserves a T-shirt.
Yes, it does. So where did we want to go now? Like here?
I guess it's still been answered in the check. My question was, can you get a hold of the data modified in the background process once you call this process? You can end it in one transaction, and after ending it, you have to modify or get a hold of the modified data.
So the question is about background processes, right? What happens to the data that the background processes modify?
Can you get a hold of the modified data within once the modification is within the background process? Within the process, you call the background process.
So the question is, how do you get hold of the data that the background process changes or updates or creates, right? Well, the only communication is in the database. So if the background process changes data in the database, you have to wait for that process to end, and then you can go and get it from the database. But you cannot get any calculated values that it may have in memory, like if it calculates a sum of something, then you have to write it to the database and read it from there.
So it works exactly like if a separate user would log on. Once that user commits transactions to the database, you can go and read them from the other session, right? So, and we actually use that for synchronization mechanism.
Yeah, but regarding consistency, it's absolutely as if it was another user. So, I think. Pardon? We are out of time. Stephen had a question up there.
Can you repeat the query of the code?
Sorry?
Can you repeat the query of it?
Yes, the question is whether you can filter the query object with AL code, and yes, you can. We do that already.
And which is the priority? Do you use code or
Code will override. I mean, depends, because if you the question is which filters take priority in the one you set from code or the one you set as properties. They both apply, so they are ANDed, you could say.
You apply the runtime. Basically, you apply the runtime filter on top of what your query exposes.
So we'll take one last question to get rid of
It has to be
the last T-shirt up here.
Yeah, so a quick one.
Here you go.
A quick one up there.
Yeah, I've got a question about security filtering again. It's been a long time since I've worked in I remember that when we did the security filtering applications, for example, CRM applications, responsibility management, you had to write a lot of extra code to make all the flow through adhere to that filter as well. Is that still valid? So the question is, if you apply a security filter to some of the entry tables, will flow fields adhere to these filters? And the short answer is yes, they will. Flow filters now respect the security filters that are set on the variable.